Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 16 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. As you can immediately tell, yes, I am feeling under the weather, to say the very least, but I'm still here to grind because it is Week 16, and we're trying to capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. Over the course of today's episode, I'll be talking about both positions at a top 16 ranking capacity, giving you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player, and of course, presenting statistics in order to justify these overall rankings. I'll also be talking about matchups in regards to which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends and quarterbacks from weeks 5 through 15 so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups going into week 16. Now, before we get into today's content, for those of you who are looking for a specific tight end or quarterback, there are timestamps down in the description of the video. While you're down there, if you appreciate the timestamps and the content, be sure to click the like button and subscribe if you have not yet already. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season for the singular purpose of trying to help you capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, so let's talk about matchups at the tight end position. We're talking about receiving statistics isolated in terms of receptions, receiving yards, and of course, receiving touchdowns from weeks 5 through 15 in order to identify the most advantageous matchups. Of course, the Denver Broncos at the top of this list for quite some time. And of course, they just most recently gave up a huge performance to Sam LaPorta, who dominated with 3 receiving touchdowns against their defense. Nonetheless, we of course want to take advantage of the Broncos, Cincinnati Bengals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers matchups. Of course, we have some pretty solid, tight ends going up against them. Pat Freiermuth against the Bengals last time out against them went for 120 receiving yards in that game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers will have their hands full with someone like Evan Engram. As to whether or not we see, Trevor Lawrence starting this week is to be determined, but of course, it is an advantageous matchup. Now, on the other end of this overall spectrum, we have some of the more disadvantageous matchups, ones that we might want to be careful with. So keep in mind, all these statistics are here available for you in order to help you make the most educated decision going into your Week 16 semifinals. Thank you very much. Let's get into talking about my top 16 tight end rankings. Before we do, again, remember, rankings are subject to change. If you guys want my updated rankings going into Saturday and Sunday morning, be sure to go ahead and check out Underdog Fantasy, link down in the description. When you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, but you'll get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours, whatever email is associated with the Underdog account. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, and include flex rankings in order to help you guys capture a championship. Thank you very much. Be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And if you sign up today before the Thursday night game between the Los Angeles Rams and New Orleans Saints, you can take advantage of Matthew Stafford going higher than 0.5 total yards in terms of a pick and play. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin with our number one tight end, Travis Kelce. As you guys can see, there is no longer a Kelce tier. Now, over the course of the last couple weeks, the S tier has been replaced with the Kelce tier, and Travis Kelce was the only one to be in that conversation. But as of late, these other tight ends are closing the gap, and Travis Kelce just hasn't played as well as he typically does. This week, he takes on the Las Vegas Raiders at home. Last time out in week 12 against the Raiders, had himself 12.1 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 91 receiving yards. We're hoping for more, consistent production from Travis Kelce, but he just doesn't look to be himself at a full capacity this season. And obviously, he's slowing down based on the overall opportunity share and, of course, his age. Either way, he is still a must start. As long as he's in your lineup, he's starting this week. Moving on to our number 2, we have Trey McBride, the thumbnail of today's episode, who is dominating on a weekly basis with Kyler Murray. From weeks 10 through 15 with Kyler, he's averaging 9 targets, 7.6 receptions, 85 receiving yards, has scored 1 touchdown in the last 5 games, but is also averaging in a half PPR 13.5 fantasy points per game. He takes on the Chicago Bears this week, who David Njoku just dominated against last week with 14 targets, 10 catches, 104 and a touchdown for 21.4 fantasy points. Trey McBride should be in a fantastic position to succeed against the Bears defense. Our number 3 is Sam LaPorta, the number 1 overall tight end in fantasy in a half PPR scoring format, has 9 touchdowns to his name this season, and is officially the greatest rookie tight end performance in fantasy football history. Of course, you're going to continue to start him up every single week, considering you have him on roster. And of course, he is the best tight end in fantasy. And like any other tight end, of course, there are going to be inconsistencies. The last 2 games that he played against the Chicago Bears, they weren't great overall performances, but there are ebbs and flows to this entire game. You're firing him every week because we know what his potential for upside looks like. And I'm sure Jared Goff wants to help him achieve that every single week. Our number 4 to close out the S tier is David Njoku, someone who over the course of the last 2 weeks has been dominating with 20-plus fantasy point performances in each of those games with Joe Flacco at quarterback. On top of it, has had himself 22 targets in the last 2 games, and he takes on the Houston Texans, the 8th best matchup at the position, allowing 11.42 fantasy points per game. Most recently, the Texans just gave up 8 catches, 104 to Jacksonville Jaguars tight ends, 7 catches for 94 to New York Jets tight ends. Now, even though those performances did not consist of a touchdown, We know that David Njoku is always in line to potentially score within a given week, especially considering they're taking on the Houston Texans, and that secondary has been, injured and, of course, hasn't played well for a majority of this season. David Njoku is a great play within the given week. On number 5, we have TJ Hockenson. He always has the potential of jumping into the S tier. It's just a matter of, can Nick Mullins get him there? Only had 7 targets last week, which is a little bit concerning, especially considering Jordan Addison got himself the 2 touchdowns, and Justin Jefferson is leading the team in terms of total targets. Considering there are so many weapons within this offense, with Ty Chandler, of course, expanding his role within this team, there is potentially less overall opportunity for TJ Hockenson within the given week. So what we have to do is hope that TJ Hockenson is going to have himself a massive revenge game against his former team, the Detroit Lions. Last time out against the Detroit Lions last season, as a Minnesota Viking, had a solid game, didn't find the end zone, but as long as the opportunity is there, the yardage will of course accumulate, and that's all we can ask for at the tight end position going into week 16. On number 6, we have George Kittle. Even though it's very similar to TJ Hockenson, there are a lot of other weapons within this offense that are going to vie for touchdowns and targets, and it does take away from George Kittle's potential upside. I mean, Debo, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, they are priority options ahead of George Kittle. Taking on the Baltimore Ravens, this defense has not played well against opposing tight ends as of late. Over the course of the last 5 games, they've given up 8.1, 13.0, 12.3, 9.8, and 10.9 fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So, potentially somewhere between 8 to 10 points is in line here for George Kittle. If he scores a touchdown, even more upside within the given game. Moving on to our number 7, close out the A tier. Speaking of the Baltimore Ravens, we have Isaiah Likely, who over the course of the last 2 games has scored a receiving touchdown in both those games, has been able to surpass over 70 receiving yards in each of those overall games, 16.8 and 15.5 half PPR fantasy points. Takes on the San Francisco 49ers, who typically are seen as a great defense in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. But last week, the Arizona Cardinals tight ends combined for 15 receptions, 172 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. So why not Isaiah Likely taking advantage of this overall matchup, considering, of course, the Baltimore Ravens are going to watch the film, they're going to dissect that defense, and, of course, take advantage of any opportunities Isaiah Likely has within the given week. On number 8 is Evan Engram. Now, I have no clue whether or not Trevor Lawrence is going to play, but I like to assume that he potentially can. If he does, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the 3rd best matchup at the tight end position. They're also the 3rd best matchup at the wide receiver position. So, of course, the passing attack of the Jacksonville Jaguars should find themselves a lot of success within the given week. Most recently, tight ends against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tucker Kraft, 4 for 57 and a touchdown. Kyle Pitts, 3 for 57 and a touchdown. Kittle with 8 and 89 and a touchdown. Schultz for 10 and 130 and a touchdown. Kincaid, 5 for 65 and a touchdown. Why not Evan Engram having himself another solid week here in an advantageous matchup? Number 9 is Hunter Henry. Now, this is under the assumption that Hunter Henry is healthy with his knee injury. And, of course, the weather in this game against the Denver Broncos isn't going to impact him and potentially lower his ranking. Again, rankings are subject to change, so we'll keep an eye on that. But over the course of the last 2 games, 17.5 and 16.1 half PPR fantasy points. Has had himself 2 receiving touchdowns in the Week 14 contest against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and most recently had himself 1 receiving touchdown and another one called back against the Kansas City Chiefs. So taking on the Denver Broncos this week, the most advantageous matchup going into the week, a defense that just gave up 3 receiving touchdowns to Sam LaPorta. I would assume that Hunter Henry's a pretty solid play going into the week, assuming he's healthy. Moving on to our number 10, we have Jake Ferguson. In each of the last 3 games, he's been able to surpass 8+ targets. That opportunity share is great. Thus far this season, in any game in which he's had 7 or more targets, he's averaging 10.45 fantasy points per game. He's done that in 8 of the last 14 games he has played within this offense. It is implicated based on the Vegas total that this is going to be the highest scoring game within the week in a potential shootout in Miami. So, of course, Jake Ferguson, associated with a top-tier offense, should hopefully find himself within the end zone and having himself a solid week as a top 10 tight end. Moving on to our number 11. To close out the B tier, we have Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet takes on the Arizona Cardinals. Most recently, the Cardinals have given up 4 catches, 40 and a touchdown to Mark Andrews, 426 and a touchdown to David Njoku, 2 for 32 and a touchdown to Dalton Schultz, and 5 receptions, 29 yards, and 2 touchdowns to Tyler Higbee. Pretty solid performances across the board. We just have to hope that Cole Kmet can continue to get himself a valid share of targets within this offense, considering the Arizona Cardinals really can't stop anyone on defense. I'm assuming that Justin Fields will continue to look in the direction of DJ Moore, but also his number 2 target, Cole Kmet, to have themselves potential fantasy upside within the given week. Moving on to our number 12. We have Dallas Goedert, who's coming off a week in which he had 9 total targets. As long as you're going to continue to get yourself a high volume of targets within a given week, of course, fantasy success is eventually going to accompany your performance. Now, last week's performance, we did have a sick overall Jalen Hurts. I'm sick right now, so we'll figure that out and see if I can put together a good performance this upcoming weekend for our Saturday and Sunday live streams. But In regards to the potential of Dallas Goedert, I think it only increases this week taking on the Giants. This is a solid matchup across the board. It's just a matter of his opportunities leading to overall production within the given week. Moving on to number 13, we have Dalton Kincaid. He takes on the 5th best matchup at the position against the Los Angeles Chargers, allowing 11.9 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Most recently, they've allowed 4 catches, 39 and a touchdown to Las Vegas tight ends, 4 catches, 54 and a touchdown to Denver tight ends, 6 catches, 63 and a touchdown to Detroit Lions tight ends, 11 for 87 to Chicago Bears tight ends. There's a lot of upside within the given matchup, assuming, of course, this isn't a blowout in the first half, and maybe the Buffalo Bills want to go ahead and put up 50 points against this defense. It's always possible. If that takes place, of course, Dalton Kincaid expected to have himself a solid overall week, assuming he's healthy. I know he's still dealing with that shoulder injury. Moving on to our 14, we have Pat Freiermuth. We know that Mason Rudolph is going to be the starting quarterback of this team, which is a little worrisome, but this is the second best matchup at the tight end position. They're allowing 13.5 fantasy points per game. In the last time out, Pat Freiermuth in Week 12 against Cincinnati, 9 catches, 120, and 16.5 fantasy points. We're hoping for more upside in that overall regard. Moving on to our number 15, we have Taysom Hill. I know that last week he played a season-low 19% of overall offensive snaps. It was mainly because he was dealing with an injury last week. He is not on the injury report going into tonight's game, so I would assume that he could potentially have himself a solid performance, assuming, of course, they give him opportunities to run the ball, because that is exactly where he finds all of his fantasy success. The final option I wanted to mention in my number 16 for this week is Darren Waller. He takes on the Philadelphia Eagles. This is assumed to be a negative game script. With that being the case, of course, Tommy DeVito should be throwing for majority of this game, and if and when he does, he should be looking in the direction of Darren Waller. You just have to go ahead and give him opportunities down the seam. He's one of the fastest tight ends in the National Football League, so hopefully in a negative game script, he'll have the opportunity and, of course, put together a solid week. He's coming off of an injury last week in the first game back, 4 catches for 40. I'm assuming he'll build upon that going into this week's matchup against Philly. All right, let's move on and let's talk about some quarterbacks, beginning with matchups. As you guys can see to the right side of the screen, the Washington Commanders, Philadelphia Eagles, Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the most advantageous matchups at the quarterback position in terms of passing statistics isolated. That's passing yards, passing touchdowns, and interceptions from weeks 5 through 15. Now, some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week consists of the Jets, the Dolphins, the New Orleans Saints, Cleveland Browns, Indianapolis Colts. Most recently, Tua Tagovailoa, despite the fact that he's one of the better quarterbacks in terms of fantasy this season, he has had himself a lot of struggles against the New York Jets. I would assume that Sam Howell is probably someone that we want to avoid going into the given week, despite how effective he has been for fantasy over the course of this entire season for us. Just wanted to go ahead and present these statistics. Let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings for week 16. All right, so as I was recording my top 16 rankings, my voice is going very quickly. And there were multiple instances at which it was going. So I'm just going to go ahead and just present to you guys the top 16 rankings. I did have a whole script for each of these individual players, but I'll go ahead and I'll expand upon it in the coming days. We'll have a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday live stream going into this weekend. So hopefully you can swing on by, but just wanted to go ahead and give you a couple thoughts about, the construction of this rankings list, just so that we're all on the same page. Of course, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, the two best quarterbacks in fantasy this season, have to be at the top of this conversation. Not only can they get it done through the air, but they'll also be able to accomplish it on the ground. They both have solid matchups against really bad teams, taking on the Giants and, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers. The A tier, another three quarterbacks who are must-starts every single week. Dak Prescott begins with his matchup against the Miami Dolphins, a pretty high-scoring event potentially on the line. And we have Lamar Jackson taking on Brock Purdy in that game. Hopefully, both these quarterbacks can produce at a high level. Of course, Lamar Jackson's been running the ball far more as of late, and especially considering Keaton Mitchell's injury, they may continue to lean upon him running the ball even more. Brock Purdy's been one of the more consistent quarterbacks. If I'm not mistaken, he's been a top 6 quarterback in fantasy for I want to say 5 of the last 7 weeks that he's played. Either way, Brock Purdy continues to deliver. We have Fields and Mahomes. Again, these are just players that are good at the quarterback position that also have great matchups. Taking on Arizona and Las Vegas, great overall matchups. We have Goff, Stafford, and Tua Tagovailoa, 3 quarterbacks that, yes, are going to be able to get it done from the pocket, but don't have any overall rushing upside. It's just a matter of, can they get past the 250 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and potentially get into that 3 touchdown range that is very difficult to accomplish. Therefore, they sit at the C tier. We have Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray, both players who went to Oklahoma, both Heisman Trophy winners, but both of them have pretty advantageous matchups going into the week. The Jacksonville Jaguars secondary struggled all season long, and of course, the Chicago Bears, even though they have had themselves 12 interceptions in the last 4 games, the expectation is that Kyler Murray should be able to have himself a solid performance, considering that defense has given up their fair share of yards to opposing quarterbacks. Jake Browning only sits at the E tier because of Jamar Chase's injury. Joe Flacco is here because he continues to play well. Jordan Love has a bunch of injured receivers, and Russell Wilson is expected to play in the snow. That covers it in terms of my top 16 quarterback rankings. I appreciate y'all. Again, this has been a grind. I'm going to try to get healthy as quickly as I possibly can. I'll see you guys tomorrow for a live stream, probably starting somewhere around 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Much appreciated. Saturday, we'll probably have an 8 a.m. morning live stream for 2 hours there prior to the kickoff of the first Saturday game. Outside of that, thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.